Hi, everybody. I have a brief lesson here that's just going to give a general overview of outlining, and then I have some individual lessons that will go over the specific parts of the essay and how to plan those specific parts. So I have this broken down into several different lessons. Okay. So one of the things to think about is how an outline can help you as a writer. So, some of the benefits you can get from an outline is it helps with your clarity and focus. So, it helps you decide like what actually goes into the paper and what might not go in the paper. Helps you make those choices. Organization and flow. It helps you decide. Does this paragraph work better at the beginning, or should that go more towards the end? It offers you flexibility. It's a lot easier to make changes to an outline than it is once you start drafting. So it does give you that flexibility to make changes as needed to some of the bigger um, elements in writing. So things like focus, organization, things like that. Um, and also, it can help to reduce stress. A lot of times, students get stressed because they have writer's block, and an outline is a good way to deal with that issue. You have something in an outline, you've had it checked over, then writing the paper should go a lot more smoothly than if you sit down and just try to write the paper from nothing, right? So it just kind of gives us that stepping stone that we can build on instead of trying to come up with ideas for a paper just off the top of our head, all right? Um, yeah, so, it just helps us decide what's going to go in the paper, organize it, easier to change, and hopefully it will take away any writer's block or other anxieties that you might have about doing the paper. All right. So the other thing to think about is my purpose in looking at an outline. Might be hard to see some of these words on here, but this is basically a screenshot of the rubric. And when you think about the rubric and the criteria of good writing, I usually think about five criteria. Am I holding up five fingers there? There we go. Five criteria. And they go from bigger kind of global issues to sort of more specific issues, smaller issues, sentence level issues. And all of these criteria are important in writing. But as we go through the writing process, we usually address these bigger criteria up at the top before we start worrying about grammar and proofreading. All right. So we're going to deal with these issues or these criteria first. So when you think about my purpose in looking at an outline, I generally want to see if you're on the right track with your assignment because it's easier to make changes to an outline than once you have a paper written. Okay. So an outline is a lot easier for me to skim. If you send me a rough draft instead of an outline, it's just I have to slow down. I have to read it a lot more closely. Whereas an outline, I can skim and say, yep, they're on the right track here. They have their paragraphs focused. Looks like they have the potential to develop the paragraphs. So they're on the right track. Let's move on. Or, oh, wow, these two paragraphs look like they might overlap. We need to address that now. Or, oh, this person isn't doing what the assignment asked, right? So it's a lot easier for me to skim and see if you're on the right track versus reading through an actual draft where I'm getting caught up in sentence level issues, and also for you, it's going to be a lot harder to make changes if I only give you feedback on a paper that you've already written. All right, so it's a lot easier for me to skim if you do an outline when you do an outline, and also as I said, these criteria, these what we have at the top is focus. Are you doing what the assignment asks? Are your paragraphs each putting forth their own unique points? Um, do you have a thesis that's kind of tying everything together? Tentative thesis when we're at the outline stage. Okay. So these are some of the bigger global issues. Higher order concerns is another term that I use to talk about those. So we can't really continue with the writing process if you're having issues with some of these criteria up here. If your paragraphs are not focused, if you have too much overlap with your paragraphs, or if you don't have a clear focus for your paragraphs, it doesn't make sense for us to go on to discuss development or coherence and clarity or editing and formatting. It wouldn't make sense to deal with that if you have problems with this level, right? So I can check those problems in an outline and we can correct them before you actually start drafting. The next thing that I will look at, so if your focus looks okay in your outline, your paragraphs seem to be clear, unified, distinct from one another, if you're on the right track with that, then I would go and check development. Now, obviously, your paper, your outline is not going to be, fully developed, but I can see if you have the potential to develop a full paper, right? And I can see if there's places where you might need to add more detail, right? I'm not looking for all that detail on your outline, but I'm looking for the possibility of details, all right? Also, are you on the right track with your introduction, your summary, all those things? So that's development. Do you have the ideas to develop the full paper? And if not, it's easier to make changes with an outline than it is with a full paper, right? Usually with coherence, clarity, and style, that's something that we wait until you have a draft, because this has to do with how sentences connect to one another and things like that. I could probably check organization in the outline. That's not listed on here, but I could check the general organization and make sure you're on the right track with that. Source of material, I can at least check that you're using sources in your paper, and if not, we can address that. Editing and formatting, we're probably not going to get too much in that in the outline, except for maybe your citations in your reference list, okay? So some of these bigger issues, it's a lot easier for me to focus on in an outline. And then if there's changes to be made, we can make them before you draft. And then move on to a draft, and then I can check some of these other issues. So if you think about it, it's really beneficial to you. It's almost like 2 rough drafts that you're getting checked, but it's not a draft, right? It's just an outline because I want to be able to skim it. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. So please, an outline for the outline assignment, a rough draft for the rough draft assignment, okay? So some general tips when it comes to doing your outline. One thing to keep in mind is you don't necessarily need to plan in the order in which the essay will ultimately appear. So what that means, let me bring over the document that you're working with, all right? So here's the outline plan here, right? And the essay is going to go in this order: introduction, summary, body paragraphs, conclusion. I usually tell people to hold off on planning the introduction until later on in the process. So personally, I would start by planning the summary. Then I would go in and start planning the body paragraphs. Then I would plan the intro and the conclusion. So you don't have to start with the intro. And in fact, it almost makes sense to hold off on that, because when you think about the intro, it's going to be like a bridge into your essay. And it's kind of hard to build a bridge if we don't know what's on the other side. All right. I've never built a bridge, but maybe I've built little bridges over a creek. But you want to kind of hold off on the introduction. Okay. So we're not going to necessarily plan in the order in which the essay will appear. Another thing with outlining, you want to find this balance between providing enough information that I can see if you're on the right track, but not giving too much information. It doesn't have to be super detailed, this outline. It's just enough to show me what you have planned for each of your paragraphs, what each paragraph's point is going to be, and what information, what quote you plan to include in that, and what personal connections for the Unit 1 essay, what personal connections you have made to that quote, all right? So just giving me a little bit of information just so I can see if you're on the right track, but try not to go overboard, especially not with big paragraphs, because remember, I want to be able to skim. Another thing that you can do in your outline is if you do get stuck in a certain area, just write a note. Write a note to yourself to come back to it later, or write a note to me letting me know that you need help with it. So I'll have students who'll say, I'm not sure what my citation should look like here, or is this quote punctuated correctly, or do I need more detail about this? So they'll write little notes to me in the outline, and that's nice for me because then I know what they need help with, and I can give them answers to their specific questions. Now, the other thing that I would ask you to do on the outline is include your citations and your reference list. I'll go over those in another lesson. Sometimes people leave those out and they don't think they're important in an outline. And I guess in theory, if you were just doing the outline for yourself, you could add those things in later. But I do like to check your citations and your reference list as early as possible so that I can make sure that you're doing them correctly and give you feedback if you need to make any changes to them. So I will ask that you include the citations and the reference list. I do have a sample that you can look at that I've been posting for you. This is not one. There's a sample essay that was loaded into the course, and I just kind of worked backwards from that and did this outline. Oops, that's not it. Here we go. So you can see here what the outline would look like. All right, so that kind of balance between enough so I can see where you're going, but not so much that it's, overwhelming for me to skim. And then there's the reference list again. You can see the citations in here. And as I said, I'll go over those in one of the upcoming lessons. All right. And also be prepared to make changes. That's what the writing process is all about, is putting out there what you have in mind, getting some feedback from an expert, and making changes as needed. Okay? All right. So I'll go into some specific areas of the outline, specific paragraphs in the next lessons, and see you on the other side. Bye.